everyone joining us here. Continues to be a tough time in Israel, in the United States, and across the world. I first want to thank our sponsor for this evening, which is Suzanne Prebatch, who's been a long-time attendee for these programs, and we've launched now a sponsorship opportunity to help support all this work. So thank you to Suzanne for being our first sponsor, and encourage everyone who believes that these are programs that are worthwhile to, you can send me an email or click the link for sponsoring programs. We certainly need your support. I also want to dedicate this evening session to Byron Wien. Byron passed away earlier this week. Many of you who are in the finance world know of Byron, who was famous for each year his top 10 surprises that he was predicting. The last time that I had a chance to speak with Byron, I asked him what he thought we should focus on in some of these programs, and he said anti-Semitism. He also handed me a book, which is all about the New York Times and its history of bias towards Jews. And I think that in some ways, maybe subtly, Byron was sending the message that that was also one of the surprises that he was predicting, that he sort of foresaw a rise in anti-Semitism that some of us probably was on our radar, but we weren't 100% sure was going to happen. It's a tough moment for us to be in. And I think in last week, many of you have seen President Claudine Gay spoke at Harvard Hillel for Shabbat dinner, and she spoke about the long history of anti-Semitism at Harvard. And I think it's something that we all have to be extremely vigilant about. And we also have to recognize that even amidst all of these battles, to make sure that any kind of anti-Semitism at Harvard, whether large or small, systemic or episodic, must be countered. At the same time, we also have to recognize that our students are still students and trying to learn and get the best that they can out of their education at Harvard. And I wanted to say that Byron was also someone who was a role model in that. When he came to Harvard, he was part of the Crimson, which was mostly Jewish. And that's because Jews were excluded from almost every other club at Harvard. And once he graduated, he was excluded from many firms until he finally carved his own path. And I think for all of us here, we would do whatever we can, and I really mean whatever we can, to combat anti-Semitism here and off campus as well. But at the same time, we need to have our resolve to make sure that we can still gain what we can from all that Harvard still has to offer us. This evening, we have a special opportunity to hear from our students. There's been a lot in the news that many of you have seen at Harvard and on other campuses. And I think it's crucial to hear what our students are also experiencing. We are fortunate enough to have 5 different students here. Please recognize that they don't represent all of the students, Jewish student experiences on campus, but we are hoping with these 5 to portray a bit of the range of experiences that are happening here. We have with us this evening, in no particular order, Zebulon Erdosh, the class of 25. He's studying English and philosophy and living in Courier House. He is the editor-in-chief of the Harvard International Review and also the Shabbat chair for Harvard Hillel. We have with us our Harvard student president, Harvard Hillel student president, Jacob Miller. He's a junior studying math, living in Lowell, and he's been a phenomenal student leader throughout this time and also beforehand. Another undergrad with us this evening is Maya Shiloni, who's an Israeli student at Harvard College. She is concentrating in government and economics with a citation in Arabic. Before coming to Harvard, Maya served for 4 years in Shmona Matayim, 8200, an elite intelligence unit in the IDF. And this summer she interned at the Knesset with MK, member of Knesset, Meirav Cohen. We have with us 2 grad students. Ari Ne'eman is a PhD candidate in health policy at Harvard. He studies long-term services and supports and disability employment policy. And last but not least, we have Nitzan Machlis, who's an Israeli educator and social activist from Jerusalem, currently pursuing her master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Nitzan's journey in education and public management began as an officer in the IDF Education Corps, where she directed the Michve Alon Military Hebrew School for immigrant and minority soldiers. In 2020, she began her undergraduate studies at Hebrew University, studying philosophy, political science, and economics. Throughout her degree, Nitzan worked in government, advising the Director General of the Ministry of Jerusalem on education policy in East Jerusalem, and interned with member of Knesset, Rabbi Gilad Kariv's office. We thank you all so much for joining us here this evening. As many of you know, we will have some time for Q&A. We have a lot of guests, so it might be a little limited, There is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So if you would like to ask a question, please click that Q&A icon. Submit your question by name, not anonymously. And if we select your question, we'll call you up and promote you to become a panelist to turn on your audio and video and ask your questions directly. And so we need to know who you are in order to do that. So please ask your questions by name. Maya, I want to begin with you. You're an Israeli student here at Harvard. I think a lot of us would like to hear what your experiences have been before the war as an Israeli student here, because I think things have gotten a little more challenging for Israelis on Harvard's campus over the past few years, and also since. How have things been?
Yeah, so I think I came here with a certain knowledge of what's happening on campus. I've been talking to current students, and I understood it was difficult. There was a lot of polarization around campus. I heard about some extreme students that would not speak to Israelis. I didn't know what to think about it that much. But when I came here, a lot of things became really clear. I'm a government concentration, which is obviously the most political department to be a part of. Maybe except like it's not a department, but maybe except the divinity school, that's the most political place to be in. So I definitely feel like I've been exposed to the worst. I feel like around 30% of the people would not become friends with me or just like decide to work with me, start meaningful connections, just because they don't want to be associated with Israelis, because it's my identity apparently is just being Israeli, nothing else about my personality is controversial for some reason. And I think a lot of the Israelis have been starting to feel that now. I think it's kind of like burst everywhere in all, like, no matter where your social life is, no matter where you are in the school, it's kind of like rising since then. But we've been like, it hasn't been easy even before that. I've been called a murderer for serving in the IDF. Another friend was called war criminal. Two of my friends were denied entrance from final clubs because they're Israelis. That was the official answer, that like for why they didn't get in. And there are like countless other organizations. There's another Israeli that started an organization. Students decided not to join as a sign of protest for him being Israeli and serving in the IDF. So it's definitely haven't been easy to be Israeli in this campus. And since October 7th, I think it kind of became legitimized to not like us, because first of all, like Israel is doing these things, and they're connecting it to us as individuals. Friends that have been saying like didn't reach out, and like I have a close friend, he went back to Israel, he's also Israeli, he's now in the reserves. And before he left, like, and one of his friends didn't like text him for like a week since October 7th happened. He was like, dude, what's up? Like, why are you not texting me? And it was like, I'm sorry, I let my political opinions to get in the way. And that was like when for a lot of people it's clicked that people don't see us as individuals. A lot of the time they see us as these representatives of a political entity. And that allows them to use us as like I don't know, like a person to inflict their political opinions on. So it wasn't easy to be Israeli. It's still not easy. But I feel like at least in the last like 3 weeks, I've definitely became closer. All the Israeli community became closer. We've been much more closer to the Jewish community. So I think we've been very lucky because of that. That's the positive thing coming out of all of this.
Can you share a little more about that, how you found support?
Yeah, I mean the day happened, like all the Israelis gathered at Hillel, and we had those amazing non-Israelis that came together with us, like Zeb here and Jacob and many other Jewish students on campus, just like ready to put everything else aside, put like schools, clubs, personal lives, like anything, to focus on helping us deal with what we're experiencing, with our grief, and also what we see on social media, the way people are talking about us. I mean, sometimes not at a later point about us as individuals, but at the like how they're describing terror attack as a liberation movement, as a resistance movement. So I think they were really there for us. Also, the Hillel staff was like totally there for us, helped us plan. I threw 2 vigils. They completely helped us with everything, like from booking the place, like getting what we needed. Like during the weekend, they were completely there for us, the students and the staff, which was like amazing because we were like all like trying to digest this. Like so many of the Israelis, I've been very lucky, and no one that is close to me died, but I have most of the Israelis knew someone close to them that died. So we were all a wreck, and the Jewish community was really here for us.
Thank you, Maya. Jacob, as the Hillel student president, can you talk a little bit about what this has been like for you? I think, Hillel prides itself on empowering student leadership, but none of us ever would have hoped that this would be the scenario that you would step into. So how has your role transformed from October 7th and onwards?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for hosting this, Rivdani. When I ran for this position, I never envisioned that it would result in something like this. I knew that there was a distinct possibility that, uh, you know, tensions around Israel would erupt on campus. I knew that would happen during Israel Apartheid Week, and it kind of happens for other reasons at other times of the year. But none of us could have envisioned something on this scale happening. Um, and I guess it's been difficult to kind of personally grieve while also working in this role to ensure that we educate our fellow peers on campus and host all these vigils. But it's also been tremendously rewarding. I feel like I've really gotten to know the Israeli students and gained a new deep respect and appreciation for them, that kind of during the hardest weeks of their lives, they were out here uh, not only mourning, but fighting a PR fight to kind of explain to their fellow peers that, murder is not okay. And, brutal rapes and kidnappings are crimes against humanity that we shouldn't tolerate. Um, so, it's been extremely busy. And it's really been different than kind of, the role that I had previously, but it's also been, I think, kind of the most meaningful thing I've done in my tenure.
As in some ways the student face of Hillel, how has that changed some of your social relationships in general on campus? Have you received pushback? What's been happening with friends, classmates, just walking around on campus?
No one's told me to my face that they kind of, dislike what I'm doing. Some people have implied it. It's definitely kind of made certain relationships awkward. But I think there is some sort of a consensus that kind of the statement put out by the PSC was beyond the veil. And, people are hesitant to kind of step up and defend that because they know how offensive that was to me and to the rest of the community. Um, on the other hand, it's, I think it's been positive with my relationships with some other people. I emailed my professor about work in a class on Sunday, and he responded to me, getting back to me about my question, and said, "By the way, I saw your interview, and I really appreciate the work you're doing." So I would say it's a mixed bag. And thankfully, there are a lot of professors here in the university who are supporting us and who have made that extremely explicit and clear. And I'm so grateful to them, and they've just been extremely kind.
Can you talk a little bit about, and I'm curious from everyone, but Jacob, I know that you wear a kippah typically. Are you still wearing a kippah on campus? Have you felt any harassment because of that, or do you know of any other students who have experienced any kind of harassment of any kind because of wearing an overtly Jewish symbol?
I'm not personally aware of anyone being harassed because they wore a Jewish symbol. There are instances of harassment. There was that Israeli student that was harassed at the business school, but I'm not aware of any incidents in which a student was targeted because of wearing a Jewish symbol, at least here at Harvard. And I continue to wear my kippah. I think the day that that it's unsafe to do that, it's really the nail in the coffin, because I will continue to wear a kippah as long as it, does not present an immediate threat to my safety. So, that for me is a red line.
I think it's also people have asked a bit. It's gone viral more recently, but the incident occurred a little while back of this HBS student who
Yeah.
was really being accosted. And I know that the Harvard University Police Department is both aware of this and also investigating the incident. Harvard University is also aware, and we will remain vigilant to make sure that every one of our students is protected, and our staff is in constant contact also with Harvard Police. Jacob, just one more question on that front. In general, how would you describe the general sense of safety and security on campus right now for you and for friends that you know?
I think physically we're all safe. I mean, so far at least we have been, and Harvard Hill has increased the security presence in the building. I think there isn't really a physical safety threat. I would say at the same time, it's kind of very uncomfortable to be on campus right now. It's uncomfortable to go to classes with peers who have defended kind of the brutal murders and rapes of your people, and justified these horrific acts. It's uncomfortable to be a part of, clubs where there are students who have signed the extremely anti-Semitic statement that the PSC put out. And it's fundamentally shifted the way I view a lot of my peers on campus, because I think it's revealed kind of the deep, insidious anti-Semitism that exists, that we weren't fully aware of beforehand. So I think physically there isn't really a threat, but I think kind of the reality of being a student at Harvard today is fundamentally different than it was a month ago.
And just one last question for you now, just so folks know, Jacob was very gracious to be here now. He does have to run to a meeting at 7:30. So just one or two follow-ups for you, Jacob. Do you have a sense of allies outside of the Jewish community, people who have been there for you and on a larger level for the community as a whole?
There are people who reached out, and when people reached out, especially early on, shortly following October 7th, it really did mean a lot. I had a couple of friends who reached out, and the fact that they were checking in does mean a lot. In the ideal world, there would kind of be unanimous outcry following the PSC, and I feel like that's been somewhat lacking from Harvard. There were signatories of the statement who had their jobs threatened, and kind of as a result of the, pressure they were under professionally, chose to retract their names. And I think that's kind of been the most we've seen, or the most kind of condemnation we've seen from students at the college. People who aren't kind of implicated or weren't implicated in this haven't really said anything about the statement. But at the same time, there has been kind of personal connections from non-Jewish friends, and non-Jewish people have been coming to some of our vigils and events, and that's been really inspiring to see.
Thank you, Jacob. Zeb, I want to turn to you before we get to our grad
All
students.
right. I just wanted to
Yeah,
add
Maya,
about
please.
your question.
Please.
I think a big support we got was from previous iTrack Israel track participants. They've been the non-obvious allies to show up to our vigils, to just check in, to post things on social media, because they have this nuanced view. They can be easily fooled, and they also see us as people, except our country, because now they know it. So I think that was a very, very important thing that happened.
Maya, that's great to hear. Not everyone who's listening knows what Israel Trek is. So do you want to just give a quick 60-second blurb about that?
Yeah, Israel Track is a trip to Israel. The trip is kind of a weird way to say it, but it's a trip to Israel for a week, and the participants are non-Jews, about 100 a year, led by their peers, Israeli students, and they learn a lot about the history, the conflict, also about the business aspect, the other cultural aspects, and they really get the full view of what Israel is. And it's a very diverse group. We usually have around 300, 400 applicants, and we get 100. We accept 100. Hopefully we'll still have these numbers this year with everything's happening. Yeah.
Thank you, Maya.
Hop off, but thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us, Jacob. Zeb, you've got a bit of an interesting background, coming from Hungary, moving to the Boston area at a young age, but maintaining a very strong connection and sense of identity to that community. I've always thought of you as one of the most thoughtful students that I've spoken with. I'd love if you could share a little bit about your conception of community coming from that background, which I think has been a little different from others, and how that's changed, or sort of how you encounter the American Jewish community and how that's changed over the last month.
Well, I think that, first of all, my parents grew up hearing from their parents that in the world, particularly in Hungary in this case, there are Jews and there are Nyilasok. The Nyilas was the Hungarian Arrow-Cross Party, the Hungarian Nazi party. And that is to say that in Hungary, there are Jews and there are anti-Semites. And I don't want to generalize to say we have no non-Jewish allies in Hungary, because that would be inaccurate. But I think all Hungarian Jews have this sense that there's us and there's that rest of the world. So we grow up with the benefit of being forced by circumstance to be a cohesive community. We've seen what perhaps my grandparents' generation, when they were a little bit naive of thinking that we could be Hungarians, what happened in the wake of that. And so in Hungary, you have a far tighter Jewish community than there exists in the US. Hungarian Jews have no question about the fact that they're Jewish. They might not be religious, they might not be openly proud about it, but it's how they were born and it's how they live their lives with the knowledge of that. You come to the US, and in the US, we have beautiful, diverse Jewish communities of all levels of observance. And I think many American Jews, unfortunately, especially before this attack, viewed their Judaism as sort of an interesting extra additional part of their identity. And so coming to America, it often feels like, it doesn't feel enough like we're one people. And I don't think we're always there enough for each other. And if I look at Harvard, I think before this, it also felt like of the 500 to 600 Jewish students at the college, probably 20% of them show up with varying frequency to Hillel events. And the other 80% I sometimes encounter in classes. They might come, they might not come. And then the attack happened. And I think that after the attack, a lot more Jewish people on campus felt like they too are in pain, seeing what happened to our Israeli classmates and to our friends and family in Israel. So I think that that is sort of a change that's occurred, and I hope that this will be a moment for American Jews to reckon more with what it means to be Jewish. But I'm very grateful for how we've come together in the face of these terrible times.
And can you also just add another voice to what your personal experience has been on campus and class and various groups? Just how have you felt, or any particular anecdotes that you'd want to share?
Well, I think what's been scariest for me is the openness with which people have been all right saying, and obviously anti-Semitic things. In Europe and Hungary, they say it to your face. I mean, the anti-Semitism is obvious. And in the US until now, anti-Semitism, I think, was almost always clouded in various ways. It might have been depicted under the aegis of anti-Zionism, and then people could argue about whether this is or isn't anti-Semitic. But we've reached a point where many of my classmates on social media openly say things where there is no debate. When you say something like, as some students have posted on their Instagram stories with their names attached, say the rhyme after me, Harvard Hillel is burning in hell, Harvard Hillel is burning in hell. They received funding from Epstein as well, and they support genocide as well. There's no question about what that means. And so it feels, just like Jacob said, alarming and uncomfortable and uninspiring to be sitting in those classes. I'm grateful for the non-Jewish friends I have, because my blocking group, for example, the people that we are in our dorm groups with, who are non-Jewish, were all very supportive in this time. But it's not the case of all students on campus.
And before we turn to our grad students, can you each just maybe paint a picture of what it feels like, say, to walk through the yard? What do you see on a given day? I think a lot of folks who are listening, have probably seen specific events, but first of all, it's been 3 weeks now, and I think it'll be really helpful for people to kind of paint that picture and get a sense of what it's really like on campus.
Well, on better days, let's say it's this morning, I walk through and I'll only encounter a person here or there tearing down a hostage poster. On worse days, like, was it 2 days ago, you can walk through the yard and hear Al Jazeera radio live from the center of the yard, spewing various kinds of hateful misinformation. Or you can see various groups of PSC organized protests and demonstrations, some of which include chants like, "From river to sea, Palestine shall be free."
Long live the Intifada.
And long live the Intifada. And especially when it shifts into these chants where there is no question what that means, that frightens me. It frightens me that some people in that crowd believe in sentiments that urge the killing of Jews and Israelis. And it frightens me that there are probably people in that crowd who don't know what that means, but have no problem going along with it and chanting it. Because if this is the generation that's going to be the leaders of tomorrow, then that's a very dark and unpromising tomorrow that awaits us.
Maya, would you want to add anything before we turn to our grad students?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know about other people, I've been pretty vocal about this issue. I've been talking at the vigil, I've been interviewing, and I feel like people have been like staring at me recently, and it's like, one person, you can doubt that, but like when it's like 10, 20 people a day, just like they know, what they think by their looks on their face, and that's just like don't feel psychologically safe on this campus. I think students here have too much to lose to actually physically attack me, and that's what makes me feel a little safer. But the way they're talking at me doesn't make me safe. I've been talking at a vigil about almost 3 weeks ago, and about a week ago came out an article specifically talking about me. 90% of the article was about me, 10% was about Jacob, specifically attacking me and my words at the vigil, which were specifically about the Jewish people. I said it's a really bad time. It's one of the worst times in the history of the Jewish people. I said we were exiled, we will not be exiled again. And this person called and Jacob said other things about anti-Semitism on campus. And this person called us these violent lies and attacked us specifically. And this is just one person, was just like felt like writing an article. But this is a much greater sentiment against Israelis and Jewish people. Just mourning. We weren't talking about Israel, like we weren't talking about Israel or Palestine. We were mourning on our friends and families, and someone decided to make, I don't know what from it. Just people have been, I think, crossed a line where they don't feel sympathy towards us anymore.
Well, and in that very same editorial, they said that it was also a violent lie, because this isn't such a bad moment in Jewish history, because pogroms and the Holocaust were far worse. So how can we pause
complain
it
about
and
this?
Complain about this? And I don't have words to characterize that.
Can I add something to Zev's previous comment?
Please, Nitzan, go ahead.
I just want to say again, I think I've really been thinking a lot about the Jewish identity issue here, and I was also very surprised how few people feel comfortable having that as part of the identity prior to these events. And what's been interesting is seeing that many of my classmates are Jewish, and I didn't even know that for a long time. And I think a lot of people feel their identity comes out when they're scared of anti-Semitism, which is natural. But some of the harder questions that I've been asking is how can we get Jews and young Jews in the States right now to feel connected to their identity through meaningful things, and not just through that fear of what that might mean for them. So I totally agree. I found it very surprising and shocking what that identity means for young people today in the States.
Nitzan, I'd love for you to talk more generally about what your experience has been. I think the Kennedy School of Government has probably for a longer time been a place which has been a hotbed of tensions, and also for Israelis, and there have been some events there in the past. And then maybe also to follow up on the thing you just said, how do you feel like your own Jewish identity has shifted over the last 3 weeks?
Yeah. So I think what's important for me to say in the beginning is that most of the time it's not as bad as it seems in the news. And I think the main reason for this is my personal experience, but the main reason for it is that most people most of the time are decent. And I think that means a lot, because a lot of what we're hearing on the news and a lot of what upsets people rightfully are the extremist voices who are shouting the loudest. But in my experience, when you talk to people one-on-one, people understand that you're going through something terrible. People are generally supportive. People don't always know. Most people don't really know enough to, in my opinion, make an informed comment. But I've been really finding strength in having these conversations with these people, and I think we should really be focused on the silent, moderate majority. Even in the Kennedy School, which is the most political campus in the world at the most political time of our lives, I have been disappointed in the conversations that I feel are not deep and nuanced enough politically. I think part of my disappointment is the faculty don't know how to lead those conversations. And I'll say that I don't think the faculty know how to lead conversations on difficult topics, even outside of Israeli-Palestinian issues, but especially on Israeli-Palestinian issues. Yeah, so I think a lot of our work has really been trying to have these conversations. I've had a lot of surprising conversations with Arab students, where I've managed to forge that connection, especially people who understand that I'm hurting and they're hurting, and sometimes we feel a connection more than I would feel with Americans who don't really know what's going on. And I think that's what we should be focused on. We should focus on the human connections. We should focus on working with people who are moderate and who don't feel comfortable voicing their opinion, and empowering them to speak more powerfully about what is obviously a clear perspective here.
Have you seen some strategies that are working on that front?
Ali, were you saying something?
Well, I just
Yeah.
wanted to chime
go
in
ahead.
real quick and say and agree, at least in my experience, the worst actors have not been Arab, Muslim, or Palestinian students. You know, they're worried about their families just like we're worried about their families. In many respects, the worst actors have been those students who don't really have a personal connection, but you know, have flocked to this because they perhaps were seeking some opportunity to glorify violence or to express their radicalism. I think we actually have quite a lot in common with Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian students on Harvard's campus. We may disagree on a number of policy issues, but we're all hurting right now. And I do believe that that's a potential basis for common ground.
And Ari or Nitsan, have you been able to have some of those conversations? Have you been able to kind of leverage what you think of as some of that common ground?
Yes, 100%. One-on-one, and I think it's okay to be at the stage where we're mostly having one-on-one conversations and slowly build that up. I think people who see that I care for them appreciate that a lot. I think Jewish and Arab and Israeli students feel isolated right now. Anyone who has a personal stake in the conflict and is so far from home feels isolated right now, and expressing that empathy goes a long way. And I think showing up is really important. I think part of what I've wanted to do as an Israeli is just take a step back. And what I've been pushing myself and pushing others to do is not take that step back, is to keep showing up, is to keep showing people what you're going through, is to be accessible for people who want to have these conversations. And showing that we're pushing through this. You know, we're not giving up, we're not disconnecting. We realize Harvard is a very important environment to be in right now. We're open to having those tough conversations, and we show up in class with our pain and with our hurt and with the stories we're carrying with us every single day.
Thank you. It's very inspiring and powerful. Ari, you've been quite involved with the Graduate Student Union and a vote on BDS. I'm hoping you could share a little bit about what that's been like. And also, not everyone knows there is a Graduate Student Union. It's maybe just 30 seconds on what exactly that is.
Sure. So Harvard's Graduate Student Union is intended to be our voice to the administration. It was organized relatively recently. I've been a member for 4 years. In 2019, I went on strike with the union. I believe very strongly in unions. I think it can help increase our wages and benefits, but recent events have really illustrated that we have some pretty serious failures of solidarity where Israeli and Jewish students are concerned. We can't count on the protection of our union as we thought we could. The Friday night after October 7th, the union circulated a call to a Monday meeting nominally about the doxing incidents on campus. And, you know, while the PSC letter was abhorrent, I think most Israelis and Jews on campus feel like the truck and singling out individual students is counterproductive. It's not something we're on board with. And so we really entered with in a hopeful mood, looking to find common ground around condemning doxing. But we very quickly learned that for a very large contingent of the union leadership, the primary interest was not doxing, but it was in attacking Israel and making some very broad pronouncements on the conflict without any acknowledgement of Hamas's horrific atrocities. And so when the Union circulated many of the resolutions that had been introduced, we saw some really shocking things. One resolution characterized people who believed that Iran should drop an atom bomb on Israel as members of a human rights movement. The resolution also condemned as a myth the idea that Hamas's desire to hurt Israeli civilians was not representative of the Palestinian people. They said that this desire was justifiable and legitimate, that faculty members who said that Hamas doesn't represent Palestinians were wrong. Personally, I think that's insulting to both Israelis and Palestinians. The resolution that had the broadest amount of support accused Israel of genocide, attacked faculty members for criticizing, not doxing, not mentioning anyone's name, but just criticizing the PSC letter. It, called on the university to divest from Israel, and it just made no acknowledgement of Israeli victims of Hamas or the hostages. So, to be totally honest with you, my desire to get involved in campus debates on Israel is, pretty similar to my desire to have a root canal sans Novocaine, but this was a bridge too far, that this union that I've worked for and that I believe in was going to get behind us. So we organized Israeli and Jewish students in the union. We tried to push back on this. We argued that the dues-paying membership as a whole should have a chance to weigh in, not just the people who show up to a last-minute meeting. Ultimately, we were able to push back the vote on some of the more outlandish statements. That we haven't defeated them yet. It's a provision in the bylaws that let us put it out by a vote of 20% of the people there to the full membership for a broader discussion, for this act of parliamentary procedure. We were called white supremacists and, practitioners of genocide and all kinds of horrible things. But I want to say one of the things that I thought was really concerning, really most frightening to me was the union did issue a statement. It was a more narrow statement than was originally proposed, but it condemned doxing, it attacked faculty members that criticized the PSC statement. And we tried to just make a very simple amendment asking them to condemn anti-Semitism alongside Islamophobia, to acknowledge that Israeli and Jewish students were scared and that the campus administration should work to protect students of all backgrounds. Shockingly, the union's leadership ruled this not germane. They refused to allow it to be debated. They refused to allow it to come to a vote. So at least as of the moment, and hopefully that'll change, at the moment, the Harvard Graduate Student Union has so far refused to condemn anti-Semitism or acknowledge safety concerns of Israeli and Jewish students. Personally, I think that's a real failure of solidarity. This experience has been really disappointing to me. But I'll just close by saying the one bright spot has been getting to know the other Israeli and Jewish students on campus who have been mobilizing around this. I do think that this experience, while it's been very alienating to me as a union member, I don't know how long I'm going to remain in the union if things don't change, has brought me a lot closer to other Israelis and Jews on campus, and that's meant a great deal to me.
And maybe Nitzan, just on that point, where have you found strength and support during this time?
So we've been working to reestablish the Jewish caucus in Harvard Kennedy School after a long time that hasn't existed, despite there being a strong Jewish presence on campus. But this isn't a group that was organized. A lot of people were not actively sharing that part of the identity. So that has been very meaningful. Also, I saw there was a question here in the comments about is Harvard in general a good choice for Jews? And I think for me, that was a big part of my choice to come here for grad school, knowing that there is a big community in Cambridge and in Somerville, and that community is a very big part of my life and of my Shabbatot and my weekends. And again, I think the one-on-one conversations with people who are decent and supportive and humane and understand that I'm going through things and being there for me, no matter what their political opinions, gives me a lot of strength. And these are conversations that I'm continuing to have going forward on a daily basis.
Great, thank you. We're going to get to audience Q&A in just one moment, but before that, I want to call out my colleague, Noah Hirsch-Rector. Noah is an education associate at Harvard. He also leads our birthright trips. Noah, maybe you could just sort of share for our broader community what your experience has been like as a staff member who works a lot on Israel, but though other things, and sort of that the tenor of that and that role has shifted.
Yeah, of course. Firstly, thanks for having me. I think the first thing to say is it's been very inspiring to see the Jewish community at Harvard come together and everyone embrace each other and understand this is a time for grief and also activism. To see how our Israeli students in particular have channeled their grief and emotion and rage, frustration into really meaningful forms of activism has also been just so impressive and encouraging. And they've set such an example for other Jewish undergraduates. Things I'm noticing amongst our sort of Jewish students who have obviously connections to Israel and family and friends, I think this gulf that everybody sometimes feels between the diaspora and Israel it's like paradoxically completely collapsed, and it's wider than ever. And I think our students are wrestling with their place in sort of the Jewish firmament and how they can best minister to our Israeli students. From a Hillel perspective, we've just tried to offer as many places and spaces for our students to digest and to process. And obviously Hillel is a deeply pluralistic and diverse community. And so everyone is united in their grief, but they're going to process this differently. And they're going to have sort of different thoughts about sort of solutions and where their political opinions fit here. So I think we have done a good job of ensuring that the space has remained united, but also has allowed in this sort of plurality of views. And it's been good. It's obviously been a challenge for the staff, but the students are like the people that you do this for, and to see them sort of come through and hug each other physically or like metaphorically as well, it's pretty inspiring.
Thank you, Noah. We're going to now move to our audience Q&A, and thank you all so much for responding so thoughtfully to these questions. Danielle Torino is an alumna of the medical school. Thank you so much for joining us. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you all tonight for joining. And I know that I've spoken with many of my other fellow alumni, and we're worried about you guys on campus. So hearing some of these things has brought a mixture of relief and not relief. So I think my question tonight is, what can we as alumni who aren't there do for you guys on campus? What would be the most powerful way for us to support you in the coming weeks, months?
Noah, maybe I'll let you start with that one, and then students also can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, in the way that you can sort of institutionally support Hillel so we can best help our students, the first thing is that we are organizing sort of donation drives that are going directly to the worst hit Israeli communities. And I'm sure like Rav Danny can send stuff out later on, but those can always use with sort of more money, and that can obviously go to great causes. There are ways to pressure the administration, which are currently happening, but these are avenues that need to be pursued further, to better recognize the way that Jews are a minority. And I think the university is finally waking up to the reality that there are certain protections that Jews need. And this is through sort of things like DEI and other avenues. And I mean, when the president, Claudine Gay, spoke at Hillel last week, she did sort of express some real vulnerability, which is very impressive that she was not aware quite the things that Jews do face in certain scenarios and have historically faced. And anything that alumni can do to hammer this message across will be so deeply felt and deeply appreciated from our perspective. And also assistance, whether it's sort of financial, moral, intellectual, as we at Hillel put together educational curricula on Zionism and on Israel and on sort of cultural Jewish things, to better educate our Jewish students and our non-Jewish students, because you hope that is the silver bullet. I know it's a cliche, but we still have to agree with it, that education is the way forward here, and dialogue. And that's things that we're trying to create programmatically here at Hillel. And we'd love alumni's help in that.
Any of the students, do you want to also chime in?
I just want to emphasize Noah's point. I think supporting Hillel is the best way. I mean, they've been, as I said before, they've been here for us, and resources are hard to get. like we have so much, we have more time in the building. They usually close at 10, now they're closed at 12, which has been a great help because I don't want to, I used to be a library, like I used to be a library person. I don't want to leave Hillel anymore because I don't feel like, you know, I feel like I need to do my work here, especially the Israel related one. So I think a lot of people just like want to be around this building, and it is really important to support the Hillel community and Hillel as an institution. And the other thing I would say is help us amplify our voices and just what we've been experiencing here and show it to the world, because people are only hearing about the doxing and about like the PC statement. They don't know what it is to be Jewish here. They don't know what it is to be Israeli. After October 7th and before, they don't know we've been discriminated against because we're Israeli, because of our identity, by other students that claim they're against discrimination, that the moment it affects them, they're like, oh, that's not okay. But until this moment, they've been doing the same things for us. So just like helping us spread our voices. If you have any ways to do that, whether it is to just like say what you heard to people that might be able to help just like spread this information, or if you have any way to help us talk to other people, that would be amazing.
It's
I
not
would-
specifically about
Go-
Harvard, but I do think related to that previous comment about Jewish identity and the ability of American Jews to have these difficult conversations, I would encourage all of you to empower the people you know and your children and your relatives and young Jewish people, and especially young liberal Jewish people, to be proud of their identity and to be capable of having these difficult conversations and saying what they think and speaking up. Because out of everything going on, that's one of the things that worries me the most. I think seeing young people in such a politically charged environment who do have important things to say, not feeling comfortable to say that, is really worrying. And I think that is our role in these communities at this time.
I would just add to that, there is a tremendous amount of talent and enthusiasm on the part of Jewish students at Harvard, and we need to find a way to connect would-be social entrepreneurs within our ranks with the considerable networks of alumni and leaders and donors to try and take that enthusiasm and turn it into practical change, both on campus and beyond. People are mad and people are engaged, and there's an opportunity, I would say, in the very near term, in the coming months, to take that engagement and turn it into something constructive. So it's my hope that we can create some spaces for students and alumni to interact with each other and talk about how we can take these moments of fear and tragedy and build something meaningful and productive out of it.
Great. Danielle, thank you so much for coming and for your question. We have a similar question, but I do think it's a little more specific. Gabriel Kreeman from the med school, please go ahead and ask your question. Thanks for joining.
Thanks again for organizing this. Again, my question is probably the same, and I think you have already articulated many of the ideas. I'm asking from the point of view of faculty, what concrete steps would you like to see? How can we help? What can we do? There have been several discussions and initiatives. Faculty have been quite active in discussion and sending letters and so on. But are there concrete steps that we can do, that we can take to help students?
I'd like to address that. I think some faculty have been great, and some faculty have been reaching out and making me feel comfortable to ask for academic accommodations, which is amazing. I would encourage you to continue reaching out to students who you know are affected, and even students who might not directly be affected, but you know they're carrying this with them, especially because this is an ongoing conflict and an ongoing war. And if for many people it was obvious in the first week that we're going through a lot, it is less obvious that a month later this is still most of what I'm feeling and thinking and doing on a daily basis. And I think reaching out directly to students is amazing, because many students don't feel comfortable, especially non-Israeli students do not feel comfortable speaking out and advocating for themselves. So I would highly recommend doing that, and also speaking to your colleagues about being aware that this is an ongoing situation that isn't, unfortunately, getting any easier.
I'll just express, I felt that the faculty letter responding to the PSC was a huge help. It was a huge relief to know that, you know, so much of the Harvard faculty viewed that with the horror that we did. And so I think we're very grateful to those faculty who took a leadership role on that. And we know it's not easy. We know that you've come into considerable amount of criticism, but we're very, very grateful.
Great. Gabriel, thank you for asking your question.
I would
If you want to go ahead. Yeah, please.
add one more thing. We've just been discussing it. The Israeli and Jewish students here, I've been doing a lot of been organizing a lot of projects. We threw vigils. We have like an event tomorrow morning. We're also working on like long-term projects. And for a lot of them, we are students. We're Harvard students, so we're probably a little more equipped than other people our age to do that. But we're still like, I'm 23. Most of the people here are like 19, 20. And we still have a lot to learn. So if you have a professional expertise that might be relevant, whether it is, you know, PR or organizations, like organization skills of some kind, if you have design skills, like whatever you can offer us, if you're willing to, we'll be really happy to get it, to hear your advice, whether it's consulting, like whatever. I bet there's so many ways we can use your knowledge and your expertise that we don't even grasp. So if you think you can offer something like that, I'd be really happy if you contact any of us. You're welcome to contact any of us.
Yeah, and the only thing I wanted to echo as well is that, for example, when Professor Barak was working on that letter and spoke at our vigils and was there for our community, it means so much when we know that there are professors who we can turn to. And we're very grateful when you help advocate for us, when you're there for us. And I think that adds added confidence and stability to our presence at Harvard. So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go now to Ron Laufer, who's an alum of the business school and maybe a future parent, but we'll see. Ron, go ahead, ask your question.
So not a future parent. I'm very much a parent of 3 kids. One of them is a senior in high school, and up to 3 weeks ago, as an alum of the Harvard Graduate School, I would obviously say, of course you have to apply to Harvard. Now I'm not sure what I'm telling him. We live in the Midwest. It's not the most Jewish-friendly environment. He wanted to go to a much more understanding and nurturing environment. And I'm just not sure what to tell him. So I'm asking you guys, what advice would you have? He can apply to anywhere.
Can I say a few words about this?
Please.
Well, I think that I always return to this article that was published in the Atlantic Monthly in the 1920s that says abhorrent things about Jewish people, and particularly Jewish people at Harvard. Of many eras, that too was a time when institutionally Harvard did much to antagonize Jews, and there were quotas on our numbers at that time. But I think that we can't let them win in this way. We can't let their hatred be something that pushes us away from Harvard. Harvard is an immense academic resource, and in many times in history has been a beacon for change and hope. And I think that we need to continue having our presence here so that we determine what that hope in that direction is, and not the hateful voices. So I think it's not always easy being a Jewish person here, but I think taking that risk and toughening up to be able to shape Harvard to match our dreams and our goals is a very important thing. And your children would find a very supportive community at Hillel.
We'll keep them safe. We're all IDF soldiers, all the Israelis. We got them. I also want to say that I don't think Harvard is the worst. I think Harvard, unfortunately, this is one of the best top schools environment that is like for Israeli and Jewish students. Unfortunately, like in Stanford, we've seen like Jewish students sent to the corner and been told that that's what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. Cornell have been crazy. So like Columbia, crazy. So to be honest, if you want your kids to go to a top institution, I think Harvard is the better choice. in terms of like anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment. And I really think this has been not a great time. I think most of the time is not like this. And there's always rough times, and that shouldn't be an indicator in your choice.
Thank you.
I think one last thing that I'll just chime in there is, we need to have a lot of humility. And so we all need to be vigilant for things getting worse, but also, we don't know where they're going to go. So I think that's, an important thing. And that's challenging in this moment. You have a child who's a senior, you're making a decision already for next year. But I don't think many people would have thought we'd be in this moment, a year ago. And so who knows where we'll be in a year. So, but thank you so much for joining. We're going to promote one last person here. Just give me 1 second here. Rossi, I'd love to promote you if I can. And just give 1 second. There you go. Rossi is joining us, I believe, from Japan. So it's great to see you. We do have an audience that has joined us over the last 3 years from about 30 different countries, and Japan is one of them. Rossi is an alum, and it's great to see you. Please go ahead and ask your question. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Can you hear me okay like this?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time and comments. It's been really, really insightful and disturbing and inspiring as well. I am a non-Jewish brother of A Pi, the Jewish fraternity. And over the last weeks, I've been in communication with a lot of my fraternity brothers and reading like the A Pi website and just kind of generally getting information from like the perspective of someone who's not ignorant about, the kind of political history and things like that. And certainly no stranger to the Jewish community, but nevertheless, as someone who is not culturally or religiously or Jewish, I'm curious now if any of you feel there's like an acute need for a specific a kind of support from the allied non-Jewish community. It sounds like you all have experienced some positive support from non-Jewish, non-Israeli classmates and friends and maybe faculty too. And I'm just wondering if there's something, a specific kind of support that might be unique to people like me who want to support and are learning and want to show up, but maybe that's slightly different from the kind of work or support that might be more necessary in a specifically like Jewish context, if that makes sense.
I think one thing is Jewish people are always perceived biased about everything related to Israel. Like, oh, you're Jewish, of course you say that about Israel. And I think there's certain like credibility that is given to non-Jewish people about that. And your voice matters, like saying like, I don't know what your perspective on Israel, but saying this is complicated and explaining how complicated it is, or just saying what you know, or saying I'm learning, but this is what I know, is really, really important. And sharing this with other people that might also have like no knowledge about this, or also think are very critical of Israel, even like are against the existence of Israel. These people like need to hear that it's complicated. Sometimes they just don't understand it's complicated. Sometimes they choose not to look at it as complicated. And when they have to face that, then things start to change. And we've seen it around campus happening. And thank you for your question.
Any other grad students, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I want to thank you for being an ally, and I want to thank you for your leadership. I do think that there is a disturbing extent to which Jewish voices are discounted on this topic, and so it's just especially impactful when you speak up and, work to amplify your Jewish friends as well as share your own voice. It means it doesn't all fall on us. And so, hearing you say that, it really gives me a great deal of hope. So I'm grateful to you.
Thank you for joining us from so far. And thank you all for joining us this evening to our large panel of students. As I said at the beginning, one of the things that we aspire to the most at Harvard Hillel is to empower Jewish student leaders. We never hope that it's in this kind of form, and yet it's been incredibly inspiring to see our students take such tremendous leadership roles, to have so much patience and poise and wisdom. And I think it gives us all a lot of hope and pride as we are preparing the next generation of Jewish leaders. So in as much as it's a difficult time and there's a lot of things that are scary, there's also a lot of hope that we see here. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We'll be back hopefully next week. We're just finalizing some programs for then. So please stay tuned for future programs. We may hear from more students in the future as things develop, but we'll also do our best to continue to bring you really relevant and high-level content related to the war in Israel and to what's going on more broadly on campus and in the world. Thank you all so much for joining, and have a wonderful evening.